Our next speaker is Shawn O'Connor. Shawn is the founder and director of Free Enterprise Society Services. It is an organization that's dedicated to returning our federal government back to its constitutional limitations. Shawn O'Connor has a doctorate of common law for 29 years of experience in paralegal and researcher. He also wrote a newsletter for Free Enterprise for almost 20 years.
Good.
Please join me in welcoming Shawn O'Connor.
I do better when I move. Anybody here at war with the government? I got news for you, the government's at war with you.
Yeah. Oh,
So lock the load, folks. And what's going on in this country, what you're feeling right now is just the tip of the iceberg of what's coming.
oh, yeah.
If we don't start acting and start acting in this country fast, you're not going to have a country. I don't have a candidate in mind either. In fact, looking at the Republican group that they're putting up there, I think if you want to entertain with everybody, get Trump in there. It's going to be a blast. It's going to be a lot of fun. But it's not going to matter who you elect. Not
Right.
one bit.
Right.
I've got a new party out there. They're called Republicrats.
Yeah.
There's an old saying, I think you folks might have heard it before. The Democrats are the party that enact all these dumb, stupid laws they expect everybody to follow. And the Republicans are the ones that make sure they stay in effect. That's not the end of that. Now, this is all a matter of perspective. I'm going to elaborate quite a bit on what Joe was saying about the income tax. 33 years ago, I was working for corporate America and not doing too bad. Had a young family, things were going well, and taxes were the last thing on my mind. Everybody knew, to file tax returns, pay income taxes. Death and taxes, you can't get out of either one. Who said that? Probably someone that works for the government. You can't fight City Hall, right? I wonder who said that. Somebody in City Hall, I think. But this isn't necessarily true. In this country, we have this thing Abraham Lincoln referred to as the Gettysburg Address, government of, for, and by the people. We've abdicated that responsibility a long time ago. And if we don't get up, we don't start taking it back, they're going to keep taking it away from us.
That's right.
You have the individual rights that the United States Constitution has guaranteed you, not given you. Those rights you have, the Constitution merely guarantees them to you if you want to fight for them. Remember this fella? He was around a couple hundred years ago. His name was Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
He said that the tree of liberty is often, or has to be, often watered by the blood of tyrants and patriots. You fit one of those groups. So if you want to keep your rights, you want to keep your constitutionally protected rights, your creator endowed rights, you have to fight for them. 33 years ago, like I said, I didn't think I'd be standing on a stage like this high. Last time I was on a stage this high, I was in North Hollywood, usually way down there. But anyway, I would never dream about being on stage talking about federal income tax. Except for the last thing on my mind. Then I picked up this crazy book. Anybody heard of Erwin Schiff?
Yep.
Yeah, it's a crazy book. It's called How Anyone Can Stop Paying Income Taxes. And I was working for corporate America, so I had a few spare minutes of time every day. Actually, in corporate America, you have a lot of spare minutes every day.
Yeah,
Not quite unlike the government. But anyway, I started reading this book, and I thought, wow, this guy, he's going to jail. After I got done reading it, I thought, yeah, he's going to jail. There's no two ways about this. So I sat down and I thought, well, this guy has got quite an education. Quite a resume on the back of his book, I think I'll check out. So I sat down and started going to a local law library. I'd never been in one before, so that was quite an endeavor in and of itself. And I started checking out everything that he was saying in his book, and it started ringing true. And I looked and I looked and I researched more and more. And then I picked up another one of his books, which was a mistake on my part, no, maybe not, called The Biggest Con. And it gave you some insight about how your government was working. That's when I got angry.
Yeah.
And that's when I started going after the government. At that point, I was a little bit naive and didn't realize the government wouldn't like what I was going through when they started coming back. So I've been at war with the government ever since, or rather, as I like to put it rather, the government's been at war with me. They're trying to take it away from me. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. They have a little book called the United States Constitution. They're governed by that. And we're supposed to enforce it. But you know, back in those days, and today, you know, everything's a matter of perspective, isn't it? It depends upon how you look at things, and it depends upon where you're standing and how you're looking at it. Now, unfortunately, I didn't bring my computer stuff with me. And if you folks can't see these, I'll pass them around. And as you look at them, don't comment on them. Just take a look at them, pass them around to each other, and whoever gets the last one to bring it back on stage, we'll talk about it. First, if you can see that, I imagine some of you can't. But if you like, you want to take it and pass it around. And whoever gets the last, please bring it back. And when it comes back up, we'll talk about perspective. Here's another picture I want you to take a look at.
Yeah.
I'm going to pass that around when it comes to the last gentleman. Maybe Chris, you can be the last one. Bring it back up. And we'll talk about that picture. We'll talk about perspective. Now, before I forget, whoever the computer guru is, or the computer guy you folks go to, if you have one, or if you do it yourselves, I have a CD I brought. It has 4 things on it. It's called The Law by Frederick Bastiat. Very good book. It gives you a lot of insight in a very short amount of time on what the law should be and how it should be enacted and how it should be carried out. Very good book if you've never read about the law before. Another one is Wages versus Income. We'll probably be taking a look at that today. It's a small pamphlet put out by St. Patriot back in the 1980s. That's on here. What is a dollar is on here. You think they're messing with their money today? Wow. You know that a dollar used to be gold and silver? It was a gold and silver coin, it really was. And if you talk to the United States government today and you lay a gold or silver dollar down, they'll tell you it's a dollar. They will. And if you take a paper dollar out of your wallet, Federal Reserve note, and put it down, they'll tell you that's a dollar. If you give them a Susan B. Anthony coin, they'll tell you it's a dollar. If you give them a presidential coin, they'll tell you it's a dollar. So I guess a dollar is anything the government says it is, right? Not quite. The Constitution does have something to say about that. It has to be still a gold to begin with. Congress can define the weight of what that dollar is going to be, but that's what it's supposed to consist of. So what's a dollar today? I don't know. Anything the government says it is, yes. And there's another pamphlet on here. It's called Which Plan Are We Following? And I'll show you that here in a minute too. So anybody that wants this on CD, take it and pass it around and make a copy of it. That's what I brought for you. We have 2 plans here. Interesting one before we get into the income tax. We have one called Communist Manifesto. You ever heard of that one? Yeah. Here's how it goes. First 10 of them. Abolition of private property. Anybody see that happening today?
No, can't have private property.
Heavy progressive income tax. We're going to talk about that. Abolition of rights of inheritance. We call it inheritance tax. Yep. Confiscation of property of rebels. I don't own anything.
Of course, we're all rebels.
I don't own anything because I can't own anything. You see, I am at war with my government, and the government's at war with me. They don't want me to have anything, so I don't have anything. The only thing they can do is come and get me. They tried that once, it didn't work out so good. They charged me with the cash rent too, but I was acquitted also. Central bank, we have that, it's called the Federal Reserve Bank. You've been watching those guys lately? They are amazing. They have this 0 interest rate that they kept down ever since what do they call it, the Great Recession. It wasn't a recession, it's a depression, and it hasn't gone away. It's still here. If you don't believe me, walk around the neighborhood, take a look inside the shops, or the shops that should have people in them that don't. Government ownership of factories and agriculture, you already have that. Government control of labor, you have that. Corporate farms, regional planning, you have that to an extent. Corporate control of education. I have grandkids coming to school, and they brought in this thing called Common Core. You folks been introduced to that yet? Oh, too, let me tell you. My grandkids come home, and I spend 3 hours debriefing them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the craziest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It is. They sit there and they take a math problem that takes about any ordinary person 5 to 10 seconds to do, and they make it a 3-minute occupation.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Right.
And then it's, Grandma, that's not the way we're supposed to do it.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what they say do. That's not the way we're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
That's what the government wants you to believe about your taxes, because it's not the way you're supposed to be doing it. Here's another plan. This is an interesting one. Freedom of religion, speech, press, and assembly. And if everybody knows that one, it's called the First Amendment. Freedom to keep and bear arms, Second Amendment. No forced quartering of troops, Third Amendment. No unreasonable search and seizure, Fourth. Freedom not to be a witness against yourself. Guarantee of due process, just compensation for taking of property. Fifth Amendment. Sixth Amendment, speedy and public trial, among others. Trial by jury is number 7. Freedom from excessive bail is number 8. No denial of any rights not otherwise mentioned. In other words, number 10, all rights not given to the government expressly by the Constitution are reserved to the states. That sound like the program we're following? It sounds kind of alien and foreign to me. But in any event, there's another thing that goes on in this country with people. And this is the government's fault, it's education. But it's all our fault too. We're where we're at today because of us.
Because of that.
Like I said, this is our government. We either control it or we don't. And I submit to you, we've advocated responsibility for doing that, and we better wrap it back, and we better do it in a hurry. But a lot of times I'll sit and I'll speak to a crowd, and I'll be looking down and I'll get blank stares back and thinking, oh boy, it struck, it's just hit again. And what I'm talking about, the hit that I'm talking about, is called the theory of cognitive dissonance. And basically this is how it works. You are taught all of your life, I'll make this really simple. You're taught all of your life a certain fact, like for example, you're taught the color black, and we all know what that is. The color of the stage up here is black, and the color white, the color of your tables are white. And you go around understanding that black is black and white is white, and that's the way it is because that's what you've been taught. Your folks have taught it, your grandparents have taught it to you, your school teachers have reinforced it for you, your college professors have reinforced it for you, the government's reinforced it for you. But then somebody comes along and says, you know what? You're not going to believe this. You've been lied to. Your entire life, by the people you trust the most, they have lied to you. That color white is not white, it is actually black, and I can prove it to you beyond a shadow of a doubt. And this stage isn't really black, it's white. And I can prove this to you beyond a shadow of a doubt, not with my opinion, but by facts. And then I'll sit down and I'll show you the facts. You're not going to believe it. You're not going to accept it, because this wall comes up in your mind. You not only will not allow the information coming in to assimilate it and then decide to reject it or accept it, you won't even let it in the first place. And so keep that theory in mind, because as we discuss the income tax a little bit more today, you may hear things that you haven't heard before. What you won't hear is you won't hear my opinion. I'm going to tell you about the law and what the law says. I'm going to tell you about the Internal Revenue Code and read to you some sites from the Internal Revenue Code. And then after you look at this, after you go chase it down and you do some research on an independent study of your own, you decide if I'm telling you the truth or if the government is right. If the government's right about me being a fraud, about me giving you false information, about me lying to you, you decide. Don't let me decide for you. And for goodness sakes, don't let the government decide for you. It's time we took it back, took this country back, and the way we do it is by critical thinking. Critical thinking is a lost art in this country. I ask several people, and especially young people, do you understand what critical thinking is? And they say, what's critical thinking? I said, yeah, that's right, exactly.
That was your goal.
We have to get back to that. So let's go back to the income tax. Joe touched on a variety of things, the 16th Amendment, the liability for the income tax, the way the Internal Revenue Service goes about enforcing it. It's very interesting. I have a very short amount of time to talk about it. In other words, I've got a little bit amount of time to talk to you about it, a long way to go. So if I speak fast, that's why. I'm trying to get input. In any event, let's talk about, go back in history a little bit. We've got two types of taxes. That was taxing powers that was given to the federal government through the United States Constitution. These kinds of taxing powers are all the taxing powers known to mankind. These powers were given to the federal government because when the federal government started forming, or first formed after that Revolutionary War was fought, they had the Articles of Confederation. They didn't work out so well. And the reason they didn't work out so well is because the federal government was not an independent body. It couldn't collect its own revenue. It couldn't sustain itself. If it needed money, it sent a letter or a bill to the states. And each of the 13 states would receive a bill and say, and Congress would say, well, we need so much money to operate this year. And the state governor would get it, and he would take it over to the state legislature, and everybody would sit down and have a really good laugh, and they'd send it back and say, we're not paying you nothing. Well, the federal government isn't going to last very long under those considerations. There were other problems with the Articles of Confederation. But they sat down and they wrote the United States Constitution, which which we're supposed to operate under today. And anyway, the taxing powers that were given in the United States Constitution, the two types of powers are direct taxation and indirect taxation. There aren't any other powers of taxation in the world. Those are the only two types known. Direct taxation works quite simply. It's a tax that's laid directly on you. You can't escape it. When the tax man comes to collect that money, you better have your wallet out because he wants the money from you. You have no choice but to pay. There's another power of taxation called indirect taxation. The way this works is it's basically an excise tax. And what happens is a product or a service is subject to a tax. For example, if you go buy tires, you pay taxes on tires. If you go employ a particular service, there'll be a tax on the service. Whatever the case may be, that's how the article or the service is taxed. It's a consumption tax. You can avoid this tax. You don't have to pay it. It's really easy. Just don't buy the product or the service. You don't have to pay the tax. It's real simple. When Jefferson was sitting down looking at these two types of taxes, he figured that the excise tax as the indirect taxation method would be the type that would be most relied upon by the government in order to finance the government's legitimate, remember that word, legitimate means and legitimate powers. That's what he figured that would happen, and that the power of direct taxation would be very rarely sought because it was going to be hard to collect the type of tax under direct taxation. Here's why. Now, the founding fathers went completely crazy when they gave all this taxing power to the federal government. Though they gave them complete power of taxation, what they did is they attached two rules to them. And the rules were this. When it came to the power of direct taxation, if the federal government was going to levy a direct tax upon you, it had to be apportioned among the several states according to their population. It worked real simple. It was a good plan. When Congress sat down and they worked out their budget and they took a look at the revenues coming in, they'd see what's, for example, because today they talk in trillions, I'm going to cut it back to millions. They'd come up with about $1 million shortfall and say, wow, here is what we're going to finance this year as legitimate means of our government exercising our legitimate powers. We're going to have $1 million shortfall. How are we going to pick this money up? They said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to enact a direct tax. Okay, how do we do that? Well, see, there's California out there. They've got 10% of the population of the country. Send them a bill for 10% of this $1 million. You got South Dakota over there. They got 1% of the population. Send them a bill for 1% of this $1 million. And so on and so forth. As the state's populations were, the tax bill would be meted out to the several states. Now, you as an individual, you never saw the federal tax collector. The federal system was not designed for you or me or anybody else ever to see a tax collector. We weren't supposed to lay eyes on these guys. That bill went to the governor. The governor sat down, presented it to the legislature, and everybody took a vote and decided how they were going to collect this tax from the federal government from the people. In other words, the state officials went around and attempted to collect the tax from the state citizens and then forwarded the bill or the tax on to the federal government. It's a really good plan. Indirect taxes, of course, were uniform throughout the United States. So the federal government, operating mostly on the basis of indirect taxation, would impose taxes on various articles. For example, on liquor, on cigarettes, on automobiles, on rubber, whatever product that the federal government wanted to tax, they could tax it as long as it was uniform throughout the country. In other words, if there was going to be a 5-cent federal tax on tires, it had to be 5 cents a tire in every state. It couldn't vary from state to state. There's good reason for this. They didn't want the states fighting among themselves, and they didn't want the senators and the representatives lobbying all day saying, well, you know, you got California, they've got all this money for making movies, they should pay higher excise taxes than this little old, well, they're not so poor anymore. State of North Dakota that doesn't have anything, they shouldn't have to pay such high direct taxes. And they decided in the end, no, there's going to be the rule, and the rule is it's going to be uniform throughout the United States. That way, guess what? If the state legislatures and the people in the state objected, they could get up and have a uniform voice to talk about this tax that affected them all equally. By the way, that's how they could work it out with the direct method of taxation, too. It was really simple. When the governor would get this tax bill, this direct tax bill to make up for $1 million shortfall, the governor could take a look at it, and the legislatures could take a look at it. And before the 17th Amendment, by the way, before the 17th Amendment, you had this little thing. I don't know if many of you remember this, but senators used to be elected by your state legislature. Did you know that? Yeah, they really did. Popular election of senators, absolutely unheard of. It was never designed to be the intention of the founding fathers. When you start having popular vote of every one of your elected representatives, you know what you have? You have a democracy. You know what you have when you have democracy, don't you? You have two wolves in a sheep vote for what's going to happen, what they're going to have for dinner. We're not supposed to be a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. But nevertheless, so the government and the legislature would get their tax bill from the federal government by virtue of this direct tax and sit back and say, what's going on up there in Washington where they need all this additional money? We want to know what's going on. They call their senators back from Washington and sit them down and say, tell us what's going on up there. We want to know everything that's happening. In other words, the federal government was answerable to the state government. I mean, I feel like I'm talking in Wonderland up here. The federal government answering to the states? Who'd have thought such a thing? I'll tell you who thought such a thing. The people that wrote the United States Constitution, that's who thought about that.
That's right, the states are superior.
Nevertheless, so we have these two types of taxation.
We don't know.
That's available to the federal government, but they have these two simple rules. And the rules are, as I just got done stating, uniform taxes have to be indirectly taxed, or have to be uniformly imposed among the several states. And direct taxation has to be apportioned among the several states according to their respective populations. There are no exceptions. None. A constitutional amendment can't change those rules. Which brings us to the income tax. Prior to the income tax that we know of today, there were two previous income taxes asserted. One was asserted during the Civil War. Nobody objected. People were kind of busy, shooting each other and having war. And Lincoln imposed the income tax to pay for the war and fund the North, and eventually the North won the war. And quietly, the income tax disappeared. But you know something about the government and revenue? Once they're in their pocket, they hate taking their hands out of your pocket. And so around 1894, they came up with this idea, let's assert another income tax. Well, Congress was sitting there and say, well, rather than that, let's do a corporation excise tax and impose an exports tax. Let's do that instead. And they said, no, let's do an income tax. And Taft got up and said, income tax? You guys are going to try to impose another income tax? Did you not read what the Supreme Court just did in Pollock case after you tried to pass an income tax previously after the Civil War? The Supreme Court already said your income tax is unconstitutional because it doesn't conform to the Constitution. And Congress sat back and thought, geez, he's got a point. The last income tax failed, what are we going to do? Well, back then, the Democratic Party, the progressives, they were calling themselves progressives at that time, decided, and they had been lobbying for a long time, they wanted a constitutional amendment for an income tax. And they lobbied for it. The Republicans said, no, actually they were conservatives. They'd say, no, we're not having an income tax. It's a dastardly tax, it's a terrible tax, we're not having an income tax. It didn't work before, it's not going to work again. But the push kept coming and coming and coming. And finally the Republicans sat back and said, you know what, why not? We'll call it an income tax, we'll impose it, but like you say, it has to be a constitutional amendment, so go for it. You see, the Republicans didn't think this constitutional amendment would ever get passed. And much to their surprise, it did. And we got the 16th Amendment. 16th Amendment is a very long amendment. Here's how it reads. Now listen carefully to it, because it says a lot in a very short amount of time. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. We'll read it again in a minute. Let me explain something to you. In the Pollock decision, the income tax was struck down as unconstitutional because the United States Supreme Court said this is a direct tax. This income tax is a direct tax. And you're imposing it contrary to the rule of apportionment. In other words, you're not apportioning it among the several states according to the Constitution. Your income tax falls for that reason. So they drafted the 16th Amendment and it was ratified. Let me read it again. Listen carefully. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes. By the way, that's an income tax that had just been previously declared unconstitutional by Congress because it was a direct tax without apportionment.
That's right.
They're going to take care of that. From whatever source derived, that'll be important here in a little bit, without apportionment among the several states. Now, wait a minute. Understand, previously what I said about direct taxes. If they impose a direct tax on you, it has to be apportioned among several states, right? The income tax is a direct tax, according to the Pollock decision. 16th Amendment says that it's going to allow the Congress to lay and collect an income tax without apportionment among several states. That's what it says. You can read it. Sounds to me like the income tax, being a direct tax, is now going to be the sole exception to any kind of rule on taxation. It won't be a uniformity rule because it's a direct tax, not an indirect tax. It won't be subject to apportionment because the 16th Amendment just said it won't be subject to apportionment. And that was going to be the end of the story. The 16th Amendment now authorized the income tax, but not so fast. Back then, all good Americans, when they saw a new tax pop up on the horizon, the first thing they did was not want to pay it. It wasn't a good idea paying taxes in those days. Nobody thought giving the government was a good idea in those days. Personally, between you and me and the fence post, I don't think it's a good idea today, but no, that's my opinion. One opinion I do have. So there was this fellow named Bruce Shaver, and his dividends from the Union Pacific Railroad were being taxed under the income tax, and he didn't like it. So he sued. And he explained to the court, relying on Pollock and a variety of other cases, that listen, this is an income tax, the same as that was imposed in 1894 that the court struck down in the Pollock decision. You cannot impose this tax on my earnings from the railroad, on my dividends from the railroad, because that's a direct tax on my property. It hasn't been apportioned. 16th Amendment or not, if it's 16th Amendment has been passed, it's unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court had some wrangling to do, and they did. And as Joe previously pointed out to you, when they were finished with the Bruce Shaver case and Eisner versus McComber and a few other cases, here's what the Supreme Court said. Now listen, this is very important. They said that this new income tax, through the 16th Amendment, folks, is not a direct tax. It couldn't possibly be a direct tax, the Supreme Court said. And the reason it can't be a direct tax is because the 16th Amendment says that the tax will be laid without apportionment. That's what it says. And the Supreme Court said if it's being laid without apportionment, it can't be a direct tax. There's only one other category of taxation this income tax can fall within. That's the indirect category of taxation. And it has to be the rule of uniformity that applies there, because one of the two rules always apply to federal taxation. So since the 16th Amendment says that an income tax no longer will be subject to the rule of apportionment, it didn't give you a new tax. It didn't give you a direct tax that now could be subject to a different rule or no rule at all and being forced upon the people as direct tax without apportionment. It's not that. It's not that at all. It's an indirect tax. And therefore, it has to be uniform throughout the country. So all the 16th Amendment did was take the income tax out of the category of direct taxation, where the public court had placed it, and put it back into the category of indirect taxation, to which the court said it inherently belonged. Now, assuming that we believe the Supreme Court, in understanding the premise that direct taxes are subject to apportionment, indirect taxes are subject to the rule of uniformity, I have a question. How is it anybody in here is paying an income tax? What is the reason for the income tax? They can't tax you directly. They can't take it out of your wages because it's not a direct tax. 16th Amendment says so. That means it has to be a tax laid upon a product or a service or something, some kind of activity you're engaging in where the service or the product or the activity you're being engaged in can be taxed. The product or the service or the activity will be taxed, not the income. That's what the court said. That was their understanding of the 16th Amendment. That's what the 16th Amendment says. If it's not subject to apportionment, it's subject to uniformity. If it's subject to uniformity, it's an indirect tax. If it's an indirect tax, they can't tax your wages and salary. But they're doing it. They're doing it anyway. And that is to be some very, very interesting, leads to some very, very interesting conundrums. Which takes us to the internal revenue. Now, understand, I generally give the seminar, it takes 3 to 4 hours to get it, and you're getting it in less than an hour. So I'm going to be cutting some corners here. Now, understanding that they can't tax you by virtue of an income tax directly on your wages and salary, you have to understand that your wages and salary aren't income. Now, Joe had a slide up here and he showed you what income was. Income was a profit or gain realized from capital or labor or both combined. And as Joe told you, when you go out and you work for a living and you have a wage and a salary, you have an investment. Your investment is in your wages. But that's quid pro quo. If you decide you're going to work for somebody for $8 an hour, you're going to give them $8 of value. They're going to give you $8 back. That's an equal exchange. There is no profit or gain here for you.
Correct.
Unless you consider your labor worthless. Everybody who considers their labor worthless, raise your hand. Because I think even the Bible says that every man is due consideration for his labor, except the government. Now, if you ask the government what your labor is worth, you want to know what the answer is? Well, they start from this really easy number, 0. And everything after 0 to them is income, and therefore they figure you're subject to the income tax because, according to the United States government, your labor is worthless. You don't think the government's at war with you? I think the government's at war with you. So let's turn to the Internal Revenue Code. Now, Joe spoke briefly about liability, how you have to be made liable for a tax before you're required to pay it. Which is a really good idea because then you're just giving the government money to give the government money. Unless there's some law that the Congress has passed that makes you liable for a tax, you simply don't owe it. And it's done very, very simply. They have liquor taxes, which is an excise tax. They have tobacco taxes, which is an excise tax. Rubber, as I previously explained to you, these are all excise taxes on products that have to be uniform throughout the United States. By the way, in my day when I first started this, I started questioning the government about this, besides being charged criminally right away for daring, asking them anything about it. I asked them, I said, well, you know, is it not true that the income tax is an indirect tax? I mean, according to these court cases, you know, internal revenue agents are really, really smart until you ask them a question that's really, really easy, and then they don't know anything. They have these little handbooks, and Joe was pointing them out to you. They're called IRMs, Internal Revenue Manuals. That's what they read. They don't read the Internal Revenue Code. They don't read Supreme Court cases, and they don't read them for good reason because they're confusing. And they won't understand what they're reading. So some group of lawyers got together in the back room and created the Internal Revenue Manuals to explain to the agents what the Internal Revenue Code meant. That's why they go about enforcing the law. They have no clue what the law says, merely what their manual says the law says. Anyway, they know how to impose a tax liability. Let me give you a couple of examples. Under Section 5703 of the Internal Revenue Code, a tax liability is created for cigarettes. So a liability is created, but you can't create a liability for payment of that tax on cigarettes until you impose the tax. So what happens is under Section 5701, the cigarette tax is imposed on the production of cigarettes. Okay, for each cigarette a manufacturer produces, they have to report to the government and pay a tax on each cigarette. The manufacturer, then under the 5703 of the Internal Revenue Code, is made liable for paying that tax to the federal government. It's really easy. The manufacturer doesn't collect the tax until he sells the product. You pay the tax when you buy the cigarette. He collects the tax from you, or he pays it by virtue of the stamp tax. If you notice when you get a pack of cigarettes, you have this stamp on the top of it, it's folded over right in the middle. The manufacturer pays to put that stamp on there, but he's going to collect that tax back from you because he's not paying it. Manufacturers don't pay taxes. Corporations don't pay taxes. You pay the taxes for them every time you buy their products. But nevertheless, the point is there is a statute within the Internal Revenue Code that imposes the tax on the product, and then a liability statute which says, you, the manufacturer of that cigarette, you're responsible for collecting and paying that tax over to us. Which is a good idea. And if you don't collect that tax and pay it over to us, after you collect it, we're going to charge you criminally. Because you're not only not paying the tax, but you're stealing money from the people. You're stealing tax money from the people that's intended for us. You're not paying it to us. That's theft. And that's why they have criminal enforcement division to enforce those types of taxes. You have the same kind of a situation with liquor tax for another example. The two sections that govern that are sections 505 and 501. 501 imposes the tax upon a gallon of liquor. 505 imposes a liability on the manufacturer of liquor. So every time he manufactures a gallon of liquor, he has to pay a tax to the federal government. Pretty good system. I mean, it's not bad at all, and it's a uniform tax. Nobody's constitutional rights are infringed upon. Your constitutional rights don't even enter into the equation. It's a good method of taxation. This method of taxation is set up by the federal government, direct and indirect, with the two applicable rules. It was a good plan. It really was a good plan, until the government decided to play with it in the Internal Revenue Code. Now, as Joe pointed out, you have three sections of the Internal Revenue Code: 6001, 6011, and 6012 of the Internal Revenue Code, which supposedly have a filing requirement for you to file returns. This is where your filing requirement arises. As Joe showed you on his slide, the IRS publications point out to you that your filing requirements arise under 6001, 6011, 6012, which I find really interesting because I've written, I don't know how many senators, state and federal senators. I've written various congressmen in the House of Representatives, and I've asked them a simple question: which sections of the Internal Revenue Code impose a tax and make me liable for the income tax? And all of these letters back, no two of them identified the exact same set of statutes. They all identified, maybe some of the statutes were identical, but they all either omitted statutes or included other statutes that other senators or congressmen didn't include. In other words, they don't have a clue. They take a look at it and say, well, I think it's this one. Well, no, I think it's this one. Well, I think it's this one. Actually, it's none of them. When you read section 6001, here are the operative words. Every person made liable for any tax imposed under this title or the collection thereof is required to file a return. So there are two events that must precede you filing that return. First off, you have to be made liable for a tax that's been imposed. Okay? Section 6001 does not impose the tax. It does not make you liable for it. It just tells you if you are made liable for this income tax that's been imposed, you're required to file a return. Well, how are you going to determine that? That statute doesn't tell you. So you move on to 6001, which states. Now we get a little bit deeper into this. When required by regulations, you see every time Congress writes a statute that you can't quite figure out, you have the administrative body sitting back there writing regulations to help you figure it out. So they'll interpret the statute for you via their regulations and let you know what it is Congress intended from. So, when required by regulation prescribed by the Secretary, any person made liable for any tax imposed under this title shall make a return. So we're back to where we were with 6001. If you've been made liable for an income tax that has been imposed under the Internal Revenue Code, you're required to file a return. Look these sections up. I'm not making this up. This is too good. I'm not this smart. I didn't make it up. This is what the law says. I'm reading it verbatim. I implore you, look it up. Go Google it. Go put the sections in your Google search screen. Hit it with 26 U.S.C. 6001, 6011, 6012, and bring the law right up for you. Don't take my word for it. 6012, returns with respect to income taxes under subtitle A, that's income tax again, shall be made by every individual having taxable year for the year gross income. So this is assuming that you have taxable income. It says if you have taxable income, gross income, you're required to file a return. Of course, you cannot discount section 6001 and 6011. The Supreme Court has told you over and over again, you cannot lift one section out of the Internal Revenue Code and say, I found my answer. That's the problem with the law. You have to take the Internal Revenue Code, you read one section, you have to read virtually the entire Internal Revenue Code to decide how the rest of the law applies to that particular section. Now these return sections, 6001, 6011, 6012, they work really well if you've been made liable for the cigarette tax or for the liquor tax, because you've been made liable for the tax that's being imposed on the liquor that you're manufacturing and the cigarettes that you're manufacturing. You fill out a return, report to the government the taxes you've collected, and send it into them. That's not a problem. That's what those sections were intended for. But we're talking about an income tax. But let's talk about this source of income before we get into this liability section. The section that makes you liable for the income tax. This is the one that is the mystery section that don't everybody hold your breath. I will get to it in a minute. that's going to make you liable for an income tax. That's going to trigger section 6001, 11, and 12. That requires you to file a return and pay the income tax. But before we go there, let's deal with gross income for a minute. Gross income is the amount of income that you make during a year on which the government says you have to pay an income tax. And if you go to section 61 of the Internal Revenue Code, you're going to find a list of items that the government says, this is a list of items of gross income from various sources. You remember the 16th Amendment? I said about the 16th Amendment. The income tax was imposed on income from sources, not the source. The source of the income wasn't taxed. In other words, your wages, you go out and you earn your wages through your labor. That's the source. You may generate income by taking your wages and investing it in a taxable, revenue taxable activity, but your wages in and of themselves are not taxable. It's rather the income that stems from your wages or your income. So anyway, section 61 of the Internal Revenue goes on to say that the following list are sources of income from which you can be taxed. And then they go on to have you believe that these sources of income that they're identifying in the code are actually income in and of itself and not the sources of income. But that's not what section 61A said. It says the following sources of income are taxable. The source isn't taxed. Remember the 16th Amendment? The source isn't taxed. The income from the source is taxed. And since wages are the source, you can't tax the wages. I didn't write this, and it's too good to be true, but I didn't write it. But they sure wrote it so you could sit down there and say, what? And it's really quite simple. When you go out, as Joe told you, and you earn your wages and your salary, you're not making a profit or a gain. You're trading your labor for wages. It's an equal exchange. If you take that money and you want to go invest it in a taxable activity, that's okay. You go ahead, feel free to do it. If you owe an income tax, I'm sure the government will let you know. But you know, Joe said something else that was pretty interesting. Did you see that on the screen? I tell you what, I saw it on the screen. I thought, wow, if that's not awesome, more than I ever saw one. When he said that our system of voluntary compliance, and I think self-assessment, is based upon a knowledge that the government will enforce its criminal laws against you. No, wait a minute. I may have missed something here. But if our income tax is based upon voluntary compliance, why do we need a criminal enforcement branch? I guess the IRS has a good reason, but I have never been able to figure out if it's voluntary, it's voluntary. But then again, I guess you have to understand the definition of the word voluntary. Voluntary means I can do it or not, right? Unless you're in the Army. Now, if you've ever been in the Army, you know what voluntary means. I need 3 volunteers, you, and you. That's how it works. And the government's idea, if you take a look at the definition of voluntary, it's you following due course and doing what you're supposed to do according to whatever you're legally mandated to do, then you're voluntarily complying with whatever you're voluntarily complying with. When I was on the stand and they were prosecuting me for failing to file a tax return, the prosecutor was looking at me and said, well, listen, he said, you come to a red light and stop, don't you? Yeah, you voluntarily do that. Yeah, I do. Yeah, you're right. I did. And he says, and you know, you don't run around murdering people, do you? I said, not yet. No, haven't done that yet.
Thinking about it.
And he says, well, see, you're voluntarily complying with laws because you know there's detrimental effects if you engage in that kind of activity. You understand that? He said, but yet you claim that you don't have to file an income tax return because it's voluntary. How do you figure that? I said, well, you know, that's kind of how you wrote the laws. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, I take a look at the criminal statute for failing to file an income tax return, and it says, anybody who's required to file a return and fails to file a return shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. And I thought that was pretty interesting. First thing I have to do is figure out who that anybody required is. Because if I'm that anybody required that didn't file a return, I could be in terrible trouble. So I have to go check out and find out that anybody required. But you know, I look at the red light traffic laws. It doesn't say anybody who's required to stop at a red stop light ought to stop. It doesn't say that. It says, you know, you're required to stop. And I checked out the homicide laws and the murder laws, and they don't say anyone who's not required to commit murder shouldn't be committing murder. That's not how the laws are written. He got confused, so we put that line of questioning. I got confused. So, here you have the Internal Revenue Code telling you three things. That you have to be made liable for a tax in order to be obligated to pay it. Before the tax you can be made liable for the tax has to be imposed. The Internal Revenue Code does this for you, by the way. The tax is imposed. The income tax is imposed according to the Internal Revenue Code under Section 1 of the Internal Revenue Code. Yes, it is. It's imposed. Do you want to know what the income tax is imposed upon?
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's imposed on income. It's not imposed on a person. It's imposed on a thing. That's how the liquor tax works too. That's how the tobacco tax works too. The income tax isn't imposed on you, it's imposed on something which happens to be income, which happens to be a profit or gain derived from labor or capital or both combined. In other words, it's not wages and salaries. That's pretty simple. So we know it's imposed. The million-dollar question is this one, and this is what that is really important. I've been doing this for 33 years. 33? Oh yeah, it's been that long. 33 years. And I have heard just about every argument as to why you're required to file and pay. Every argument you can imagine why you're not required to file and pay. Some of them pan out, some of them maybe not so much. You can deduce various theories of law. By the way, did I get my picture back yet? You can deduce various theories of law from how the income tax works according to when you start reading this complicated morass of statutes to determine, gee, how does the income tax work with me? Depends upon your perspective. Now, I trust everybody didn't talk to each other when they looked at these because I did not do that thing. So who saw the chalice? So who saw two people talking to each other? Different perspective, isn't it? It just depends upon how you look at things. You look at it one way, you see two people talking. You look at it another way, you see a chalice. I was doing this with my granddaughters the other day, and they caught that one pretty quick. One of them said, and they didn't talk about it once, I see the chalice, and I see the people. And then they both looked at it and go, well, now I see the chalice. Well, yeah, now I see the people. It's funny. It depends upon how you look at things and from what perspective. To you, the income tax laws look at something entirely different than it looks like to me. I looked at it from a different perspective. I've studied the law for years and years and years. I know exactly what the income tax is and how it works and why we have it. I can tell you history behind the income tax that I wish I could forget. Sometimes I wish I hadn't done this. You can wake up in the cold sweats and nightmares over this stuff. Really can. So in this one, who saw the old lady, the old witch in here? Yeah, who saw the young lady? This is a tougher one, but they're both there. They are both there. So, everybody that saw the young lady, raise your hand. Now, can you see the old lady there?
Yes.
And the young ones, okay, just a matter of perspective, folks. It depends on how you look at things. So, the million-dollar question, the tax liability. Because though they impose the income tax on income, you know that. Section 61A of the Internal Revenue Code says so. Check it out. Don't take my word for it. You want to know this. You know, here's the thing I tell most folks when I'm performing these seminars. Check it out. Look at it. Make sure I'm telling you the truth. Because I could be up here lying to you like crazy. I could be exactly what the government calls me, one of the biggest scams that I've ever walked the face of the earth, second to Joe, because I don't want to take over his project. But that's how the government wants you looking at us. And they have good reason for it. So many good reasons for it. Imagine what would happen to this country without the income tax. Can you imagine what would happen? Think about this. Let's see. Our defense is going down. No, it's not. As a matter of fact, the income tax don't have anything to do with supporting our defensive costs. Running the legitimate, you know, this is a key word. The legitimate functions of the federal government, we need that to pay. We need income tax to pay for that. No, we don't. The excise taxes, the imposts, the export taxes, they all take care of the legitimate functions, just like Jefferson said they would. He said again, remember, no direct taxes except in time of emergency because they would be so difficult to impose. They would be so difficult to collect. We would only do it in times of emergencies, extreme measures. That's what Jefferson said. Little would he know what would transgress and what would happen. So we're still looking for that liability section for the Internal Revenue Code that's applicable to the income tax. And I know attorneys from the east to the west, from the north to the south in this country that have looked. I know paralegals, hundreds of them that have looked. I know tens of thousands of people like you sitting in the audience that have looked. We have all one thing in common. We can't find a section in the Internal Revenue Code that makes somebody liable for the income tax, excepting one. There's one. It falls under section 1461 of the Internal Revenue Code. And here's what it says. Okay. Every person required to deduct and withhold any tax under this chapter is hereby made liable for such tax. So if you're a person that's required to deduct and withhold taxes for whatever reason, for whatever tax that's been imposed, you're collecting that tax. You are the person, the revenue agent, collecting that tax. You have to pay it to the government, and you have to make a return to them to show them the tax that you collected. You're made liable because you collected it. And that liability means if you don't give us our money, you have stolen it from the people, you have stolen it from the government, and we're going to put you in jail for grand theft.
Yeah, that's where to get it.
So here's a person made liable for the income tax, the only one we can find, and that is a person who withholds and collects income taxes. And as Joe was intimating when he was up there showing you his slides under the Criminal Investigation Division, where they deal with international law and international income and people living and working abroad. Yeah, those are the people that make you liable. Those are the people that income tax may be imposed upon. But for you and I living in here and working within the several states and in the United States, we're simply not made liable for the income tax. There's a really good reason for this. Because the collection of the income tax as an indirect tax, or as a direct tax without apportionment, is unconstitutional. The government doesn't like to hear that, by the way. And if you tell them their tax is unconstitutional in a court of law, you will go to jail, because telling them that their law is unconstitutional is no defense. Now you think about that for a minute. Let's see, who's the government? People, yeah, it's us. Yeah, it's us. But if we tell them that, hey, you've got an unconstitutional law here and you're being tried for violating the law, that's not a defense. You're going to jail for daring to say their law is unconstitutional. Am I the only one up here that thinks there is something wrong with this? I think there's something terribly wrong with this. So that's where your income tax liability comes from. I'm only got about 5 minutes left. And I don't know if I can get this whole story, and I'm going to give it a rule. It's called Sockdolager. It has to do with Davy Crockett. I'm sure you're all familiar with Davy Crockett. And he fought that down, I believe. And he was also a representative for several terms up in Congress. And while he was in Congress, he was known as the Lion of Washington because he was a very good speaker, a very good orator. When he spoke, everybody stopped and listened. Unlike me having a colleague doing my hers in my house, he was very, very good at public speaking. And one day, while he was sitting there, a vote came up in Congress to appropriate $10,000 for the widow of an admiral in the Navy, a very renowned admiral. He had done his duty, fought in many wars, won many battles, saved our country. And back in those days, there was no retirement system for soldiers. And so a bond came up to vote to give this widow $10,000 to take care of her for the rest of her life. Back in those days, $10,000 was a lot of money. Take care of her the rest of her life and live in the comfort that she had been used to living in. And Congress said, well, you know, this admiral, he gave his all for this country, and this woman had such a great, great man she was married to, we need to appropriate $10,000 for her. And it was a foregone conclusion that this law was going to pass. It was a done deal. And as everybody expected, when it came Crockett's turn to talk, he was going to get up and give one of his eloquent speeches. And then it would pass with a resounding vote. Everybody would go home feeling good and patting each other back and telling them what great people they are for giving away the taxpayers' money. And here's what Congress said, or what Crockett said instead. He said, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to read this because, as I say, I'm not as eloquent as he was. I have as much respect for the memory of the deceased and as much sympathy for the sufferings of the living, if suffering there be, as any man in this house, but we must not permit our respect for the dead or our sympathy for a part of the living to lead us into an act of injustice to the balance of the living. I will not go into an argument to prove that Congress has no power to appropriate this money in an act of charity. Every member upon this floor knows it. We have the right as individuals to give away as much of our own money as we please in charity, but as members of Congress, we have no right so to appropriate a dollar for the public money, of the public money. Some eloquent appeals have been made to us upon the ground that it is a debt due the deceased. Mr. Speaker, the deceased lived long after the close of the war. He was in office to the day of his death. And I have never heard that the argument that he was in arrears to the government. This government can owe no debts but for services rendered in at a stipulated price. If it is a debt, how much is it? Has it been audited and for the amount due ascertained? If it is a debt, is it not the place to present it for payment or to have its merits examined? If it is a debt, we owe more than we can ever hope to pay, for we owe the widow of every soldier who fought in the war of 1812 precisely the same amount. There is a woman in my neighborhood, the woman of as gallant a man as ever shouldered a musket. He fell in battle. She is as good in every respect as this lady, and is as poor. She is earning her daily bread by her daily labor. And if I were to introduce a bill to appropriate $5,000 or $10,000 for her benefit, I should be laughed at, and my bill would not get 5 votes in this House. There are thousands of widows in this country, just as such as the one I have spoken of, but we never hear of any of these large debts to them. Sir, this is no debt. The government did not owe it to the deceased when he was alive. He could not contract it after he died. I do not wish to be rude, but I must be plain. Every man in the House knows it's not a debt. We cannot, without the grossest corruption, appropriate this money as payment of a debt. We have not the semblance of authority to appropriate it as charity. Mr. Speaker, I have said we have the right to give as much money of our own as we please. I am the poorest man on the floor. I cannot vote for this bill, but I will give 1 week's pay on this object. And if every member of Congress will do the same, it will amount to more than what the bill asks. Well,
That's it.
you can bet what happened to that bill. It went down in flames. It did not get passed. Now, there was a young man in the gallery that admired Crockett, and he was very incensed by what Crockett had done, and he ran Crockett down in his office. And the story is quite long, but I'm going to paraphrase it. And shooting Crockett out for condemning this vote. Crockett explained to him why this vote was unconstitutional. He explained to him that while he was out electioneering for re-election to Congress, how he met a man called Horatio Bunce in his district and sat down, and Bunce looked at him and said, "You're David Crockett, aren't you?" David said, "Yes, and I'm out here electioneering to get your vote again." And the man said, "Well, I voted for you once, but I'm not making that mistake again because obviously you have no understanding of the Constitution. And if you do have an understanding of the Constitution and you did what you did anyway, what you did was illegal." And what Crockett had done, and the other Congress had done, is one night they were standing on the Capitol Hill and they were looking over the river, and Georgetown was on fire. So they jumped into their carriages and they crossed the bridge and they worked all night to put out the fire in Georgetown. Crockett said he had never worked so hard in his life that night, but many, many houses burned, many, many families were made homeless, many left with nothing but the clothes on their back. And Congress got together in an emergency session the next day and appropriated $20,000 for the victims of the fire at Georgetown. And this was the vote Bunce was referring to. And he told Crockett, he said, "I've read the Constitution and it is clear. You have no power to appropriate that kind of money for those reasons. If you wanted to go give charity of your own, you certainly could have. If all of the congressmen up there who hold the dollar so renowned that they will do anything while they're in office to collect this money and then put it away in their accounts until it comes time to be reelected and then spend it with abandon because they want to be reelected, but they won't give any to support a charity, you have to kind of wonder what kind of people in office. Anyway, I won't be voting for you again." Crockett tried to argue his point, but at every time Horatio Bunce cut him down, and finally Crockett had to resign to the fact that what he was hit with was called a sockdologer. And that's the name of the story. It's called a sockdologer. And sockdologer means, the definition, is that which ends or settles a matter, a decisive blow, something unusually large. So he relayed this story to that young man. And in closing, after he explained the story to the young man, why he voted against the bill for the widow, here's how he closed. He said, "There is one thing now I wish to bring to your attention. You remember that I proposed to give a week's pay? There in that house, there are very many wealthy men who think nothing of spending a week's pay, or a dozen of them, for a dinner or a wine party when they have something to accomplish by it. Some of those men have made beautiful speeches upon the great debt of gratitude which the country owed the deceased. A debt which could not be paid by money, a sum of $10,000. In an insignificant and worthless amount of money, $10,000, when weighed against the honor of the nation. Yet not one of them responded to my proposition. Money with them is nothing but trash when it comes out of the people. But it is the one great thing for which most of them are striving, and many of them sacrifice honor, integrity, and justice to obtain." And ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you, that's your government today. Thank you.
What a great presentation by Mr. O'Connor.
Before he leaves, one last question. Sir, when I just won $100 million from the lottery, where is it in the Constitution that the government can stick their filthy hands into my pocket and take half of it?
Yeah, you gotta go find that liability statute, don't you?
That's it?
That's it.
Wow, thank you.